So now that you've seen that simple clip, we can go ahead and actually get started by importing our plugin. So if we go to the Asset Store panel here, we can see that we have a plugin called Post Processing Stack. So it's pretty simple. Just look that up and you'll see this icon right here. And we can go ahead and import into our scene. It's a very small package, so it'll import fairly quickly. Alright. So it's just a bunch of scripts, basically, a bunch of C# scripts and a bunch of different just shaders and stuff like that in there that helps our camera and our scene look a bit nicer. So let's go ahead and import that. Alright, so now that the plugin has imported in, we can actually start. So the first thing we need to do is add a new script to our camera, so our main camera, and we're going to call this a post-processing, or we're going to add the post-processing behavior script, okay? So go ahead and add that. And this just has one variable here, pretty simple variable. It's our profile. So what's a profile? I'll get to that in a minute. So as you can see in our scene, nothing changes. We can turn it off and turn it on, and absolutely nothing changes. So why is that? Well, that's because we've not added our profile. So we can go ahead and go into our project panel here. We can create a new post-processing profile. Now, we'll just call this something simple, like simple. And this is our profile. So it looks pretty cool. They did a good job on all of the UI here. So to start off, what is all of these settings? So there's a lot of settings here. So anti-aliasing, ambient occlusion, depth of field, motion blur, all of these settings. So we're going to start off with the anti-aliasing. So we can enable that, but nothing changes. That's because we haven't set up our profile in our inspector here. So let's just drag that into our post-processing behavior script. And turn it off again, and turn it on. And what does it do? Well, we can zoom in here on the trees and turn it off. And everything is very sharp. It's very sharp. The pixels are very sharp. So if we turn this on, it just smooths them out, basically. So you can you can bump it up a lot, turn it down, just basically change the settings for this, and it changes how smooth it's gonna take those pixels, how smooth it's gonna make those pixels. So that's pretty simple, but what about all of these other settings? We'll get to those later, but to start off, let's go to our first person character, and let's play this. So just to show you guys that we can play this without it bugging out. Alright, so now that you've seen the basic, what our terrain looks like without any cool effects other than anti-aliasing, we can go ahead and change more settings. So let's go ahead and turn on ambient occlusion here. Just enable it. And you can't really see any changes. Now, why is that? Let's zoom in here to our trees and you can see changes. Alright, so now that we're under a shadow and we enable ambient occlusion, you can see that places that are supposed to be darker get darker, and the places that are supposed to be lighter get a little bit lighter. So the shadows change, it adds a little bit more shadow. So for example, right here, this little part right here, this does not look very realistic because the top shadow is the same as the bottom shadow, right? And that's not very realistic because shadows have different layers to them. So one part of the shadow will be darker than the other part. So ambient occlusion basically just takes this and enables it. So it basically takes it and puts different layers to the shadow, and it not only does that, but if Unity misses a certain place that is supposed to have a shadow, ambient occlusion will enable that. Now, note this is not a real-time thing, so if you click play and you change an object, it's not really going to do anything because it's basically baked in almost. So it's definitely not real time. Alright, so next cool effect. Next one is screen space reflection. Don't really know what that one does. Changed around with it, but doesn't really do much. Now, depth of field, that's the next setting we're going to go over. And this one is super cool. This is one of my favorites by far. And it basically allows you to take things that are in the background and blurs them out. So the closer you get to them, the more focused they are. So focal length, we can change this. There we go. So as you can see, the trees are now blurry, but the grass over here is not. So we're just going to make the mountain blurry. There we go. Mountain's a bit blurry now. Focus distance, kind of make it blur all that stuff out. So now, as you can see, the things that are closer to us have a little bit more focus, and the things that are farther away, you can't see as well. Alright? So if we play this now. You can see that it looks pretty cool. Things in the background blurred out, and the closer you get to them, the less blurred they are. And that's pretty simple. Next one is motion blur. So motion blur, what does that do? Well, that one's also one of my favorites, but it can make a lot of people sick. So if you're going to be using it in your game, I don't really recommend doing that, because personally, I don't like motion blur in most games, just because it doesn't look too well to me. It kind of makes me sick sometimes. And settings for this, shutter angle and sample count. So shutter angle, basically it's just the exposure time. So the longer the motion blur is and the shorter the motion blur is. Sample count, same thing, just kind of how detailed the blur is, basically. Alright, now, next one, eye adaptation. I don't like this one. Your eye has to adapt to the light, and I personally don't like this one. Depends on what you're using the game for. Alright. Let's turn that one off just because it doesn't look too good. So, next setting, bloom. This is another one of my favorites. What is bloom? Well, bloom is basically takes the lighter levels of your scene and brightens them up and spreads them out. So for example, if we turn the intensity up on this, you can see that the sky over here, the brighter part of the sky, gets a whole lot brighter, and it extends it out farther across the sky. So again, basically taking the lighter parts and brightening them up. And it also blurs the other parts around the light, right there. And radius, all that stuff, pretty simple. The radius just makes it so that the blur that's coming off of your bloom is either less or a hell lot more. So as you can see, the blur and the light itself is definitely a whole lot more. And the less you have it, the sharper your hill in the background is going to be, or the thing that's in front of the light is going to be. And dirt. What is dirt? Well, pretty self-explanatory. Dirt. Just look up dirt. And we have lens dirt. So that's pretty simple, lens dirt. Now, what does that do? That basically takes your bloom effect and kind of makes it a little dirty. Almost, now it kind of looks like a laser beam, because so for example, turn our intensity up we can see that our dirt is affecting the bloom. So if we don't have dirt here, turn it off. The light is very smooth. And that's not realistic. Dirt, let's add that in. And as you can see, it basically expands our light. It makes it dirty, so some parts of it aren't going to expand so well, and some parts are. Alright, so that's pretty simple. Now, next is color grading. Turn this on, and, well, you can kind of see what happens. We can change the settings in here, so black in, white in, all that stuff. And you can make it look cool, make it look like a dark scene here. Scary horror game, pretty easy to make. And also the color, so the channels, like the red color, the green color, all that stuff. You can change all of that too. There we go. Next, all the other stuff from here is pretty self-explanatory, other than these two things here. I don't really know what those do. Grain, pretty simple, it just adds grain to your scene. I don't like this so much. Depends on what you use, what you're making. Vignette, I love this. This is something I've used in many things, especially when I'm rendering in Blender. I definitely use Vignette just because it makes it look a whole lot cooler. It makes it look darker. And dithering, well, this is nothing to configure. Just turn it on and it doesn't really do anything. Alright, so that is all of our different settings for our profile here. You can have multiple post-processing profiles, and you can switch between them through scripts. It's pretty simple. Just take your post-processing behavior script, put it into, make it a variable in your script, and then just say your script post-processing behavior profile is equal to, and then you set your new profile. Now that makes it cool, so that if you are, for example, going underwater, when you hit the water, it changes your profile so that it's blurry and it looks like it's underwater, right? So that makes it look a whole lot cooler, and it's also a cool way to create different effects in your game. So, for example, you're walking and you go into a new biome or whatever it is, and your post-processing profile changes so that it looks a lot different. And when you go back, it changes back. So there's a lot of different things you can do here. There's a lot of different possibilities with this plugin. But that is it for this tutorial, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Yeah,